Hello, Maverick fans. Welcome to another edition of the Mavpuckcast. Thank you for tuning in. We are almost done with this season.
We we are almost we think we're almost done. We don't think it's going to we don't know how much longer it's going to go on, but the season is winding down.
We see the end of the tunnel.
Yes, the light is
We
in
may
sight.
actually be there. We don't know. That'll be the topic of conversation later on.
Yes.
But first, this team we haven't seen too frequently, I guess, right? You know, some Denver Pios or whatever. And
You
dear
know,
God.
we actually had a nice amount of success against them during the regular season this year. Something that had not happened the past few seasons. It was nice to see. It was nice for the team to kind of get that monkey off their back. And then the playoffs rolled around.
I think we have to talk going into this because I mean, based on our conversations, I have a feeling that you kind of think the same thing that I think, which is the news had come out. What was it? Earlier this week. I can't remember. Was it Tuesday or something that Denver was going to be there, but because of COVID protocols and contact tracing, they were skating with like 18.
Yeah, it was a reduced number of players. What was it, like 16, 18. I think the game when the game rolled around against us, they had 16 skaters during the
16
game,
skaters, right?
which is barely enough skaters
Right.
to field
And
three line. It's you got basically what, three lines.
right. Yeah, and I got I bring it up because I have a feeling that news kind of got into the guys' heads a little bit. So
Yeah.
we start the game. What's your thoughts on that first period when the guys come out of the gate there?
I actually thought we looked pretty good that first period, to be perfectly honest with you. I wasn't particularly worried at that point. I thought, we look all right. We look good. It was a fast game. Teams were zipping up and down the ice. I thought, eventually my gut instinct was that as the game wore on, our superior depth, and when I say superior depth, I'm not saying that we have, on a player by player basis, superior players. I'm sure that they have more draft picks than we do at this point in time. All I'm saying is that we have a lot of depth. We've got a lot of talented players, top to bottom, from first line to fourth line. And I just thought to myself, we're going to wear them out by the time the third period rolls around. And
Yeah, I was not impressed with the guys out of the gate. I thought that their passing was off, their flow was weird, their assignments there was a lot of misreads and stuff out there. Going to the wrong place and stuff. We just weren't generating chances that we needed to. But it didn't
that off
concern me
right.
because
Yeah,
I because you expected it, right?
it
Like
was early.
Denver's sitting here going, "We're shorthanded. We know we're shorthanded. We have to anticipate. Like your goal is if coaching, DU in this situation, I would be worried about our capability as Denver, with a limited roster to come back in a close game or to find a goal late, something that like I want to lead going into the third. I want to be ahead with some comfort room. So let's go all out right out of the get go, try to catch the other team off guard and get a big lead to begin. And that's what I expected from Denver, and I that's what I thought we got. And they get on the board first, and I'm thinking that's what I expect. What we need to do is answer back, and luckily we did. Smallage gets a goal from Sullivan, and then like a minute later, you've got Miller from Abate and Randall, and I'm thinking that's it. Like
Yeah,
we weathered the storm. We've got the lead out of the first. I'm feeling pretty good about, even though our play wasn't great in the first, that we're in a good position. And hopefully at that point in time, I was thinking that we'd start to stem the tide. Like we'd start to pick up the play.
right, exactly. And I know you mentioned out of the gate that the team didn't look that great, and that didn't bother me because obviously this is the first the first game of the conference playoffs. You're on the road. Obviously, they had just played at North Dakota the weekend before, so and it's a place that they've the last month have been very familiar with because they played a 2-game series there, and they played a single game to end the season up at North Dakota against the Fighting Hawks. So I wasn't worried about it. A little bit of that out of the gate wasn't bad. It was a little bit of a concern when Denver got the first goal because the day before, Colorado College, who was the other team in the NCHC that was hampered by COVID as far as players went, they got the first goal against St. Cloud State, who was the number 2 seed, and they gave St. Cloud State all that they could handle for 3 periods. So I was a little bit worried, but when Smallage and Miller got those 2 goals toward the end of the first period, I was feeling good that we were up 2-1. Obviously, that's not an insurmountable lead but I thought this is good. Going into the second period, we've got the momentum at our backs. We got the wind at our backs. I thought if this team gets one more goal, I'm thinking that's probably going to be it. Our depth will wear them down. They won't, because when you have to play coming back from a deficit like that, I think psychologically and physically, it just takes a lot more out of you trying to come back from being down as opposed to playing, kind of an even score game down the stretch.
Yeah, I still think our play was lackluster in the second.
Okay. Jason was not, and I remember Jason texted me. Jason was not happy with their play. And certainly we have seen better performances. This team has had its moments where it's looked like a well-oiled machine. It's also had some games toward the end of the season, regular season in particular, where passing was off. It wasn't that tape-to-tape kind of passing that the best UNO teams that we've seen the past decade or so have presented. So,
and I said this in the last podcast. Denver has more to gain from this game than UNO does.
Right.
And so I just felt like you can't, like a 1-goal game, you can't let him hang around. And even when Weiss gets his goal in the second period, right after that, I'm like, I don't know that 2's enough. And then Bobby Brink scores for Denver, and we end the second. We're still only up 3-2, and I'm like, it's not enough.
Right. A 1-goal lead is too, as I was mentioning earlier, a 1-goal lead is too close for comfort because it's the psychological game. When you're down by 2 goals, it's a lot more. You have to give a lot more to try and make a comeback. And you've got that hurdle of getting 2 goals. When it's 1 goal, you know that any kind of, odd bounce, weird neutral zone turnover, and that game can be tied up. So, yep.
Yeah, which is what happened. I mean, you gave Denver a power play. You gave them some space and some opportunity on a team that's tired, and they get the goal. And I think the story of this year has been penalties.
Right.
Like our penalty kill saved our bacon in the pod. Towards the end of the pod. And then through the first half of the season, we had that amazing streak of penalty kills and stuff. And you knew that eventually that was going to come back to bite you in the last few games against North Dakota and then this game too. I mean, Denver goes 2 for 5. Like, you just don't give them a chance. Like, stop giving them an opportunity to get back into this game. Well, you're up, play 5-5, make them skate 200. If you got nothing, dump it in. Don't reach, don't clutch, don't grab, don't stick check. Like, play the body. Like, it's
absolutely,
it's straightforward. And
you look at, you talk about the special teams play, the penalty kill streak that they had. Ultimately, that was one of those things where you were kind of worried when that penalty, the PK streak ended, because you're like, once it ends, are the floodgates going to open? Because when you have that streak going, it becomes one of those things where the guys play a little bit harder. They block a few more shots each game. It's one of those things where they do everything in their power to try to keep that streak going. And then once the streak ends, which I believe it ended at home against North Dakota a month and a half or so ago, I believe that's where it ended. Then when that happened, you wondered. And the penalty kill's still been good, but it hasn't been as good when they had that streak going. or in the early
Right.
parts of the season. So yeah, you don't want to give them those opportunities. In this game you had, you know, the you had a 5 minute major for UNO, which caused one of was that Tuamisto, or was that who was ejected
Yeah.
for Denver? I think it was. And then we turned around and got a 5 minute, and now his name's escaping me because it's late and we're talking about this late at night.
Sundberg.
Sundberg, yes, Martin
Yeah.
Sundberg that was the call that fans were debating back and forth whether it was contact to the head or not. I think you thought it was contact to the head. I will say that I still thought, it was kind of a shoulder to shoulder hit. I don't know that the head was ever hit. I'm just basing this on the replay that I saw on the feed. So, but regardless,
They had already tossed to Amisto, so as far as I was
yes,
concerned,
yeah,
if it was anywhere near, I mean, if you
they were going to do the makeup call.
it was totally going to be the makeup call,
especially when you're playing a team with a roster that is that limited. And like I said,
Yeah.
I think they had 16 skaters. I could be confusing that with Colorado College, but regardless, they did not have the full roster playing. Still a number of talented players on Denver, probably more than Colorado College had to use. So plenty of firepower, plenty of defensive power, and then Cronin in goal is a terrific goaltender in this conference. But yes, I was hoping that we could hold that 3-0 lead, but we didn't hold that 3-0 lead in the third.
The 3-1 lead.
Or excuse me, 3-1 lead. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, because they get the power play goal late, so you're going into the third down. You're only up 1 going into the third.
Yep.
And then 42 seconds in is when Benning gets his goal, and it's like suddenly you've got most of the third, and you're at a level game with a team. And wondering, like, are they really that tired? And here's the deal. We talked to, I think it was in our group chat and stuff. I had said, sometimes it's not actually, depending on who it is, it's not actually a detriment to have a limited bench.
Right.
And I think that's what we had. Like, the guys that were missing were not really the top end talents. And so what you ended up with is you ended up with their key guys out there over and over and over and over again.
Right.
Olszewski. I think he ends up with a couple points in the night, right? Because he's practically every other shift.
Well, and you can't discount, too, that this team had a weekend off, whereas UNO was traveling to North Dakota. These guys had the weekend off, and like we've talked about on the podcast, sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes it's a bad thing to have that weekend off, but they knew who they were going to be playing. They knew that they were going to be playing us. And they had time to prepare, and they were also very kind of coy and very careful about who was or who wasn't going to be playing on their roster. So that kind of gave them some sort of a little psychological advantage. And I think it's possible UNO was kind of looking past DU in this game. Right. And that's not to take anything away from UNO. They played hard and they played well. And if you look at the last 2 minutes of the third period, and I actually went back and watched this to see if my recollection was right, and it was. We basically controlled the puck in our own zone with Isaiah Seville pulled for the final 2 minutes of the game, and we had 3 or 4 grade A opportunities. They just didn't go down. Unfortunately, we were in that position at the end of the game, and if one of those drops, we might be having a very different conversation right now. But ultimately, Denver, and give them all the credit here, they came out as the lower seed, hamstrung by a short bench, and they got the win against us. They were the upset special. That was not the upset special that Jason and I were thinking was going to happen in the first round of the CCHA playoffs. We thought it was going to be Western over UMD, and I know Dave Starman expressed sentiments that were similar to that on one of the Midco broadcasts that I watched. But give them credit. They end up coming out of the game with a 5-4 victory.
Yeah, it's a heartbreaker for UNO, right? Like, you had a chance to get out of that first round, the quarterfinals, for the first time, and do it against a team that's been your nemesis.
Yep.
And ultimately it comes down to they didn't get the job done. Like,
no.
They played hard. They had a great season. uh, you look back on this, and as a coach, I have to say, like, the opportunity was there.
Yeah,
You didn't take advantage of it.
right. Yeah, it's we've talked about this team. One of the narratives that's developed over the past decade or so with the team, and I know it seems like it's indicative of one coach or another, but one of the things is our struggles in late February and early March for this team. And obviously, we finished the season with 4 straight games against North Dakota, so nobody's looking at that. Especially against the incarnation of North Dakota that exists this season, and are expecting that we're going to, run the tables against North Dakota to end of the season. But, um, there was some question as to whether UNO was playing their best hockey going into the NCHC playoffs, and that's been a question in recent years. And I don't know the case. I felt like they had an opportunity against Denver. They didn't get it done. If this had been a home series at Baxter Arena, like it would have been during a normal season, I think that they would have won 2 of 3 against Denver. Uh, but you never know. And that was not the format, and that was not the circumstances that they were playing under. It was a disappointing loss. I was really hopeful that they would break through and get a win and move on to the quote unquote frozen face off this year with the final 4 teams in the conference tournament. That didn't happen. Denver wins. And then all hell breaks loose on Twitter regarding our chances for the NCAA tournament.
Which we will get to in just a minute after we pick the players of the game.
Okay. Yep, we got to do that. We got to get our guys in. Well, this is an interesting one. I
don't know that there's an easy pick here.
There's definitely not an easy pick here. Obviously, it'd be very easy to pick one of the goal scorers, Jason Smallage, getting that first goal for UNO to tie it up in the first period was very important. Tyler Weiss, a player we probably talk about more than we should on the podcast. He gets the second one, and Nate Konepke got. Am I missing a goal here? Oh, yeah, Matt Miller gets the second goal. Tyler Weiss gets the third. Nate Konepke gets our fourth goal in the third period. There's
no players with 2 points.
No, there's no players with 2 points. Looking down the assists, it was definitely a nice mix of players. And this is a tough one. I'm going to go. I think we'll go with. This is where I think we're going to go with Nate Konepke in the latter half of the third period, getting the tying goal at that point in the game. DU was up 4-3 at that point. I wasn't quite sure what was going to happen. I was really worried that if DU at that point got another goal, it would be 5-3, and that would be it for the Mavs. But he did get the tying goal. So the last, 7 minutes, it looked like UNO could try to hold on, maybe take it to the overtime period, which would be a full 20-minute overtime period. Unfortunately, about a minute and a half or so later, DU gets the game-winning goal. But I'm going to go with Nate Konepke because he's a guy we don't talk a lot about on the podcast, but he's a player that has really been a transfer player from Minnesota, and we've talked about the players that we've gotten from the transfer portal in recent years. And he's a player, again, we don't know if he'll come back or not, but if some of these seniors opt to come back, which they can do because of COVID, he would be a nice blue liner to see back in the lineup. So I'll go with Nate Konepke, a guy who's again, somebody that we don't talk about a lot on this podcast, but I'll go with him. I could have gone with a guy that didn't really show up on the stat sheet, but that's who I'll go with.
I can see where you're coming through there, yeah. I think since it could be my last time this season being able to pick him, I'm going to pick Weiss. Okay. Partly because of that. Partly because I really feel like, especially in the first and second period when I felt the team was struggling, he was doing what we needed him to do, what we would expect him to do. He uses his skills, his hands, and his skating ability to create space and opportunities
Right.
for the other guys on his line, and his goal in the second period was, it was nice to see. Usually I would expect that to go the other way, Weiss to Ward, but you know, we need him to be able to shoot when he has a clear opportunity like that, when it is the
Right.
best play. And he's starting to recognize that, and that's, I think, what gives me a lot of excitement for the future, provided he stays. As one of the kids that's a draft pick and a junior, you always question, will he go or will he stay, kind of thing, because it's usually the year that they make a decision if they're going to see it all the way through.
Well, and let me address that, because I was actually going back and reading articles. This was a few weeks ago on Tyler Weiss. This was back a few years ago when he had uh, decommitted from Boston
Boston.
University, and this was right around the time of the draft when he was picked by the Avalanche, and we found out that he was coming to UNO. And one of the things that he said in one of the articles I read was that the Colorado Avalanche had him on a 3-year plan. Now, I don't know if that plan has changed, but this is the third year. So we don't know what will happen. And the commentators in our game broadcast in this playoff game versus DU had mentioned something about, and maybe you picked up on this or not, so I don't want to delve too much into it, because I can't remember exactly what they said. 5 minutes later, I'm like, what exactly did he say? But he was talking about some of the undrafted players and the opportunity for the NHL here after the collegiate season's over. And he mentioned in particular Primo and Brandon Scanlon, who are two undrafted players on the UNO roster, and there might be an opportunity for them in the NHL. And I'm like, wait, dude, what are you talking about? We do not want to. I do not want to lose. I do not want to lose Primo or Scanny at this juncture. And maybe you remember what they said about that. I can't remember. Um,
Yeah, I mean, they were talking about guys that develop later. There's
yeah,
some guys like Weiss that at a young age, scouts and stuff recognize that he had potential,
right,
right? And he's drafted where he is the year that he's drafted because they see something there that could be developed, right?
right,
And you always try to, as a scout, anticipate where they will be and how that development's going to go. And so they looked at him and thought a 3-year plan probably puts him to where
yes,
he needs to
exactly.
be. Whereas, someone like Primu, who else did you say? Scanlon.
Primo,
Those are guys that when they played in junior hockey or USHL, wherever they were before coming to college. Those are guys that just they didn't look like they had it, right? And so you can only pick so many players, and this is their opportunity to say, we can do it. Now, both of those players, I would say, I don't know that there's enough of a resume for a league to take a flyer on them.
No, and to use an example from UNO's past, there was a player who played for UNO, a very talented forward by the name of Bill Thomas, who ultimately ended up in the NHL. And he came to UNO, was paired with Scott Parse on a line. They both did fantastically. They both played for the Tri-City Storm in the USHL and juniors. And what was interesting about the Bill Thomas story was, like Scott Parse, um, or maybe Scott Parse had been drafted, the years start
Yeah,
to
he was
fade. But
drafted by LA.
okay, yeah, he was drafted by the Los Angeles Kings. So, but Bill Thomas was not. And
Correct.
the 2 seasons that he played with UNO, quite honestly, there was some question whether he was the more talented forward than Scott Parse. Ultimately, because he wasn't drafted, he ended up leaving in the hours following UNO's first NCAA tournament appearance in 2006 against Boston University in Worcester, Massachusetts. The Coyotes organization, which uh, at that point Wayne Gretzky was involved with, ended up picking him up. So I was standing on a beach in Rhode Island after that regional at Worcester, and I got a phone call that he had left to go play professional hockey. Now, what's interesting about this is that I knew before that game against BU that he was going to go play, or at least I had an inkling, because at the pregame party beforehand, there were a number of the player parents there, including Bill Thomas's father, who was an incredibly friendly individual. And he had always said hi to Bridget and I at games. And we were sitting there at that pregame party, and he comes up to me and he's like, "John, I just want to tell you, it's been really nice getting to know you over the last couple of seasons." And I'm like, wow, this is like a farewell speech. And I'm like, well, I guess that means he's gone. And that kind of stuff drives me nuts, because that can prove, and some of the other players were there and they were just kind of like giving me looks. The player parents were there and they were giving me looks. And I'm like, that's just got to be, especially for UNO, a team that's not loaded with draft picks, that's got to be something that's just kind of a distraction for a team going into an NCAA tournament game. And ultimately we lost 9-2, and we'll never know if that kind of stuff had an inkling on it. But yeah, when you mentioned Tyler Weiss there, will he be back? I think he'll probably be back, but you never know. You never know with COVID and everything that's gone on, what these guys, what opportunities they might have, what they might be thinking that they might like to do, what the organization wants to do.
Yeah, the contact rules are still the same, so they're not discussing it with player agents or anything like that. So, ultimately it comes down to the player deciding, what is the best case for me. A player, to use Weiss as an example, you just finished your junior year, you've made progression. So you're going to sit there and say, where do I fit in with the Avs organization right now? Because if they sign me, where do they send me? And wherever I expect them, looking at this, I'm trying to do this in a way that because I know I get in trouble if I seem like I'm suggesting things, so I'm trying not to. But, if he looks and says, I'm going to go to this team for the, in the Avs depth organization, if that's the AHL or the ECHL or whatever, will I get what I need to develop to reach my goals there? Or will I stand a better chance staying in college hockey and playing another year there? Because a lot of kids make the wrong decision. I
Yep.
see it. We see it all the time with.
Yep.
You usually see it with clubs like DU and North Dakota that have a lot more draft picks, that they leave early thinking, we just had a good season, I'm gonna go tear it up in the AHL and I'll be in the NHL within a year, right?
Right.
And what they find is that the caliber of talent and stuff is so much higher that, yeah, your learning curve is gonna be steeper because you're playing against better players, but at the same point in time, your opportunities to prove yourself are less.
Right.
And you end up with these guys that just are AHL journeymen that were, second round draft picks and stuff, because they just don't get the playing time that they need, that they would have gotten if they'd gone back to college.
I know. And I always get worried this time of year because of things like family advisors and other stuff. And I just, it's when again, I didn't play hockey as a kid, but these guys dream of playing professional hockey from the time they're little. They're just little kids out there on the ice learning to skate. And so I get nervous, but we won't pile on to the disappointing loss to Denver and worry about whether Jason's player of the game is going to come back or not. We're gonna hope it.
Any of them. I mean, Seville, like we've picked him in the past.
Yeah.
He's another guy that, do the Knights need a depth goaltender?
Right.
And is he going to get the reps? He's a classic example. Like, am I better off being the starter at UNO or the backup for, an ECHL team, or the starter for an ECHL team, or the backup for an AHL team?
Right.
Like, where do you really fit in that organization? You've got to look at their depth and say, where would I go? Because I can't reach out to the team and say, hey, if I sign, where are you going to put me? Like, that's against the rules. So, they're not going to do that. And, it's funny because I've got friends that are scouts that I've talked to in the past, and I said, just taking your temperature, right? Like, in general speaking, I'm sure there's exceptions to every rule, but generally speaking, if a college kid was allowed to come up to you and say, would it be better to go back for my senior season or come play for, a minor league club? And he said, almost to a T, they all said, well over the majority of the time that they would recommend that they go back to college because they get the playing time, they get the reps, even though the talent isn't as high. Um, there's no substitute for having the puck on your stick. That's what one of them told me, and it's
Right.
like that's true. Like you got to just say, "Where's my best opportunity?" And it's going to be different for each player. And I don't fault them for making a decision to leave. It sucks. I'd like to see every kid stick it out here for 4 years and be seniors and see what we can do. But realistically, they're going to say this is the best opportunity for me, and good for them.
Yeah. I'm not a big pro hockey guy, so I'd rather they stay here the full 4 years because I've seen a lot of the cautionary tales that you're talking about,
Yeah.
where they just fizzle out and you never hear from them again, or they
Scott Parse.
yeah.
I mean, Scott Parse is a classic example.
He was a classic example. He was a guy who he ended up getting injured while he was a Mav, and his career just never. It never ended up. It never ended up going to the next level.
Right.
And then we saw some guys with UNO who stayed the full 4 years, who were undrafted, who went and played in the ECHL, ended up in the AHL, appeared in a few games in the NHL, and had long and fruitful careers, like a guy like Jeff Hogan. So it's kind of weird how that works out.
I think you mentioned that you're not a big pro hockey guy, and I'm just a big hockey guy in general. So
Jason is a big pro hockey guy. It seems like every single day I talk to him, he's watching the Colorado Avalanche. I'm like, I could not be an NHL fan. I'm exhausted after the college hockey season following UNO. But this, I mean, it's like literally, the Avs are playing. I mean, I feel like I could text Jason at like 3 a.m. and the Avs would be playing hockey somewhere against some other NHL. I mean, it's like the number of games that they play is during a typical season in the NHL, I just think is crazy. And I think it'd be really tough to be. Can you imagine trying to have an attendance streak?
I know people who did.
That would be an impressive thing. That would be a very, very impressive thing. So yeah.
Yeah, 41 home games in the regular season. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
But something for our fans that maybe aren't, maybe they're in your boat where they're not, they maybe only follow, UNO players in the NHL. So
right. Yep.
They're watching Gensel and Archie and
yep.
That's pretty much it. So
sure.
This year's going to be, obviously because of COVID and stuff, this summer's, it's going to be a weird summer. I've seen a lot of people say like last year's draft was the weird draft. I think this year's draft's going to be worse because last year they got to see the kids heading into it. So even though things got canceled in February, March time for a lot of these players and stuff, like you still had this book on these prospects. And so, yeah, you're drafting them via Zoom, which is just strange and weird. But this year, it's going to be harder because, we've talked about it, right? Look at the players that are playing for some of these East Coast teams, where they only got like 10 games in the season. And the NHL scouts can't be in the rink watching them because they're not allowed. And so they're watching film on these guys. And it's like, now we have to go into a room and we have to convince our GMs that this is the kid we should draft number 1 overall.
Yeah. And
he's only played 5 games this year. So, we're taking who takes a flyer on a first round draft pick should not be a flyer. Well, you take flyers on like 3rd and 4th round draft picks.
One of the things I'd say too is there are certain junior teams that opted not to play this year.
Right.
And that definitely affected a percentage of players. The ECAC, like most of their conference didn't play this season. So you're right. It's been a bizarre year. And then I don't follow all levels of hockey that closely, but it's also affected, younger players too, high school age hockey players, etc. I'm sure have been affected by some of the states that have had restrictions that have made it difficult to play. I know that Massachusetts for a while had a restriction that you couldn't practice hockey, you couldn't play hockey, so you had players going out of the state to play hockey, and then the government officials were upset about that. So it just becomes a really difficult situation. So you're right. It'd be very, very interesting. It'll be interesting to see what happens with the Mavs, but hopefully, hopefully the Mavs will get to play a little bit more.
So let's talk about playing a little bit more.
Let's-
In order for them to play a little bit more, they have to get picked to go into the field of 16 for the NCAA playoffs.
Which I think you and I, going into the NCHC playoffs, had felt fairly confident would happen. But now there seems to be an overall lack of confidence based, number one, on DU beating us. Number two, on the comments of the head coach of DU, which casts some doubt in the minds of fans and the college hockey intelligentsia on the interwebs. And so this is a really, really interesting thing. For those who don't know, and this was something Jason alluded to earlier in the season in a podcast, and when he mentioned it, everybody gave him crap for it. But he mentioned how a tie this season, there was a new overtime rule that was voted on and approved summer of 2020 that went into effect for college hockey this season that said rather than having the 5-on-5 5-minute overtime period after regulation if a game is tied, that this season they would go with a 3-on-3 5-minute overtime period. Okay. Now, as far as your schedule and results in the NCAA record books go, if a team scores a goal in that 3-on-3 overtime period, it counts in their record as a win. But as far as kind of weighting the teams, I believe their RPI factors into this. It only counts as 55% of a win. Whereas if you lose in that 3-on-3 overtime period, it counts as 45% of a win. Now, I don't know what brainiacs decided to weight things this way, but that's the situation we're living under. So the argument that DU made after defeating us in the first round of the NCHC playoffs is that the 4 or 5 games that we played that went to overtime, we played 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
5.
Right. That the ones that were wins really shouldn't count as wins because they were only 55% of a win. And it's at this point, Jason, where when I saw this stuff after the game and throughout the weekend, my head is starting to throb, and I'm like, boy, there is nothing I find more irritating than college hockey tournament selection limbo in the seasons when UNO's actually in contention, because it's like, if they're going to get down to the nitty gritty like that, and the Notre Dame coach Jeff Jackson mentioned the same thing regarding his team versus UNO in Denver, it's going to be a very, very interesting selection.
And, unlike previous years, this isn't a mathematical equation.
Right. No pairwise rankings this year. So,
because before we'd always say, all right, top 12, 13 are usually assured to get in.
Yep.
Because you always have to anticipate that someone, you're going to take the champion from WCHA, and it doesn't happen to be Minnesota State Mankato, and so now you have to take that team plus Minnesota State Mankato, right?
Right.
That's happened before. Those types of things where it's like you only planned to take the one team that was actually good in that conference, and now some crazy team went on a streak and won their conference tournament, and so you have to take them, and and so sometimes you might be in the rankings a 14, 15, 16 team, and you're considered quote unquote a bubble team, right?
Right.
14 to 18, 14 to 19. Those are typically your bubble teams. Those are the teams that may get in, may get out. Depends on if things bounce their way, right?
Right.
But now we don't have that. Like now you're in the situation of you're having to make complete arguments about who you are as a team and what that means. And, I fully expect that they're going to use some sort of criteria about whether or not the game that they are going to, see in the first round is going to be entertaining, and try to justify it based on on them just wanting to see, so and so play someone. Like I go into it saying we talked about this, right? Like Boston's going to make the tournament. Fully expect Boston to make the tournament. And because of where they sit and where UNO would sit, like to me that's a storyline. UNO made their first against Boston. Now it's kind of the rematch. You get a chance to go against Boston again.
Right. See, Jason likes really kind of in this instance, kind of the college basketball model. Cause I really enjoy March Madness every year in college basketball. And that's what they do. They try to find intriguing matchups that are an interesting story. Like you mentioned, UNO's first appearance had been, or sometimes, a coach taking on another head coach who was a former assistant, something like that. You could see something like that. You could also see them potentially try to, keep teams close geographically where they are if there are concerns from athletic administrators about a lot of travel. You could potentially see, more Western teams out West and more Eastern teams out East than you normally do. There's just a lot of theories. I mean, and I kept this one. I kept a screenshot of this one from College Hockey News, Adam Woden, who his prediction is, this was just a few hours ago. His prediction was, he thinks that there are going to be 3 NCHC teams, 3 Big Ten teams, 2 WCHA teams, 4 Hockey East teams, 1 ECAC team, and 2 from Atlantic Hockey. And then the final spot would go to either Notre Dame or the winner of the Bemidji Lake Superior State game in the WCHA playoffs. And that's interesting because I can't remember the last time since the realignment when the NCHC and the Big Ten hockey conferences were formed that we've seen 3 WCHA teams in the NCAA tournament. Maybe I'm just biased because there wasn't non-conference play and I didn't really get to see those teams in action this season. And maybe my bias based on historical perspective with these conferences going in, but it's very, very interesting that basically Woden has, completely eliminated UNO and DU from the narrative since there was so much debate and is just going with the top 3 teams in the conference. He's going with North Dakota, Minnesota Duluth, and St. Cloud State. So
and that's arguments to be made. I've seen people that, I mean, not to that extent, but to say like, I've heard the argument that North Dakota, St. Cloud, Minnesota Duluth get in. Right. But I can't decide between Omaha and Denver and who to take.
So have
I don't take either of them so that I don't have to make one of them mad. They're both upset.
You're exactly right. And there were some people also who were making the argument that they had five NCHC teams in there. I don't think that'd be happening. But if I were to do that, if I were in charge of this and I got to pick anybody I want, what I would do is DU, if they get in, they would be the host school in Loveland, Colorado. So that's the regional they will go to, regardless of what their seed is. I would have a situation there where I would put DU in that regional. I'd put UNO in that regional if you were letting 5 teams in, and I'd let them play in the first game, and I'd just let those 2 teams duke it out to see which one actually deserves supremacy. And then that would decide it once and for all. It's really, really interesting, to hear the arguments, the overtime games, how they're weighted this season. UNO, we've talked about the fact that they played 17 of 24 at home. And even though some of the pod games were technically neutral site games, they had an advantage because they played more home games than any other team in the NCAA. Whereas, Denver played 6 of the 22 regular season games that they played only 6 at Magnus Arena. So they were playing someplace but their home ice. So there's a lot of interesting narratives here. And then you wonder if it's because of COVID and because it's a weird season, if the people selecting will try to do the fairness thing and be more balanced and let more teams in that maybe shouldn't be in. But because we don't have a pairwise system that kind of eliminates that human element. I mean, and like Jason said, you might have a situation where they just try to make interesting matchups for the TV broadcasts.
I think they have to. This is not a year where you are going to rely in any one of these regionals on ticket sales. This is a TV product. This is the 2 things I'm looking for if I was on a selection committee. I want a competitive, entertaining game, and I want a storyline that I can pitch the heck out of every intermission. Like those two things, that's what matters to me. I don't care necessarily about your record. Like I'm obviously not going to pick a car or college just to get a storyline, but I mean, like when I'm trying to decide which of these 8 teams fill the final 4 spots, that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking, where did I put these other teams? I'm going to fill out my bracket, right? Here's my number 1 at this regional. Here's my 2, 3 at this regional. All right, where am I putting these teams? Because if I can slip them in and have a storyline and a competitive game, then that's what's going to drive your TV viewership, and that's going to help you in the future. When CBS Sports, when NBC, when ESPN decides to pick up college hockey because they're picking up more NHL hockey and say, hey, maybe we should pick up some of these college games because there's good hockey there. They're going to make that determination based on what you do here now this year.
The only concern I have with the Jason scenario, intriguing though it may be, is that I worry that in that instance, then there's going to be a temptation to put in the name institution. So
right.
They're going to want to put in a potentially like a Notre Dame over Omaha, or a Providence over a Lake Superior State, because those are the names that casual sports fans are going to tune in. They're familiar with. And
I mean, I sent you guys in the group text my crazy one, which was, I'm picking all the teams that just like logically have a chance to upset. I'm going to put Providence in against North Dakota because let's be serious. Providence has a record, a history, a long history of coming in as a team that you should just beat the snot out of, and they'll wallop you.
So Jason just wants to piss everybody.
I was just like,
just piss everybody.
If you want to know what my NCAA men's basketball bracket looks like, it's every underdog all the way through.
Yes, Jason loves those, 5 seed versus 12 seed updates or upsets in the basketball tournament that, are fun to watch.
16 versus 1? Yeah, we'll do that. 16, sure.
I will say about the college hockey tournament, though, that we have seen the lowest seed upset the top seed. We've seen the, Rochester Institute of Technologies. We've seen the American Internationals of the world get upsets in recent years. So that can happen regardless of whether you have the top teams. But Jason's formulary is intriguing. I'm just going to be very fascinated to see what they end up doing. If they do like Jason says, and they just try to come up with intriguing matchups from the teams that they think are the ones that they want to have, or are they going to keep them geographically lined so they're not traveling around as much, or are they going to do like an Adam Woden suggests and try to have kind of a relatively even split between Eastern teams and Western teams? I just don't know. And again, Jason and I were fairly confident about Omaha getting in. Jason, I don't know what your thoughts are. Do you think that we're going to get in, or are you like me? Are you just kind of like scratching your head like, I won't really know until we watch the selection show on ESPN this coming week?
I don't think we get in.
Okay, so and do you think that's because of the loss to DU and how they performed against North Dakota? Do you think it's going to be a scenario like Adam Woden where you don't think either of them get in? You don't think Denver or UNO get in, and it's just 3 from the NCHC?
That one I think is a tough call. There's a storyline with Denver because of their, streak of getting in and their pedigree in college hockey, but I don't know. I personally, I have a hard time saying let's bring in one of these, let's bring in another WCHA team or something, in place of that, because the NCHC has been such a powerhouse conference.
Right.
I don't know how you can argue that if, let's put UNO, take UNO, put them in the WCHA, and convince me that they're not competing for a number 1 spot.
Right.
right? Like
Right.
take Colorado College in there, and I would put Colorado College in the top half of that league easy,
Right. In
if
another
not
conference,
higher.
Colorado College, yeah, Colorado College is a very competitive and a very intriguing team. That's interesting, and a lot of people have the theory you have. I'm gonna. My gut instinct has been that I still think UNO is gonna find their way in, and I just think that I think it goes to overall record. I think it goes to their performance over the entire season, regardless of those five, 55, the 455% wins or whatever. But they need to change that. They just need to go back to the way that it was. It's ridiculous. I liked it better before there was, this 3-on-3 overtime, before you had shootouts and all that other crap. I liked it better when there was 60 minutes of play and there was a 5-minute 5-on-5 overtime, and whatever happened in that time was what happened. So if it ended in a tie, it was a tie. And as the conference race went, you got 2 points for a win, you got 1 point for a tie, and you got 0 points for a loss. There were no extra conference points. There were none of that. I like that. I like that early on when I was following college hockey. I'd like to see it again because it just simplified it, and you didn't have a bunch of this kind of stuff going on, which nobody really knew that this was going to come up this season when they made the rule change. A lot of people thought that a regular college hockey season was going to get played with interconference play and the pairwise rankings. And so it actually might be really interesting when you're playing in a normal season scenario, but it's not. But I still, my gut instinct says UNO finds its way in. At 14, 10-1 overall. You look at the teams that we played. The only thing that I've said that I think could be a hindrance is the fact that we played so many games at Baxter Arena. I do think somebody could point that out and say, well, they got to play a lot of games at their home ice. Maybe that helped them this season. I just don't see that.
Yeah, but you could also say they've had to go to the toughest building
right
in college hockey more than any other team,
Yep.
and they found success there. So,
Yep.
yeah. I mean, yes, we haven't been on the road, but when we have been on the road,
we've played well.
We're still competitive, and that's the thing is UNO's been in every game. So this is the challenge, right? Is like I don't think there's anything I say as to this is the reason why they should get in or they shouldn't get in. You could easily turn around and say, yeah, well, what about Denver? They've been great. Okay, yeah, but they also lost to Colorado College. They also got blanked by Miami.
Right. Exactly. And
So which Denver are you letting in? Are you letting in the Denver that's got, everything on the line and is going to play like there's no tomorrow like they did in the tournament, or are you going to get the team that was lackluster and complacent at the beginning of the season? Right. I don't know.
I don't know either. I have no idea. And like you said, they lost to Colorado College. We got the season sweep of Colorado College. I know. It's a challenging situation. I don't
envy their position. It's just, the crazy thing is that I don't know that I'm going to be happy no matter what. This is one of those this is where I really want to make the argument for that concept of letting 20 teams into the tournament. And say
Jason's just going. I know.
No, the play-in game. I know you've heard this. I
understand.
Change the format to 20 teams and say the last 4 teams in those bottom 4 teams that didn't win their conference tournament, that were those teams and these 4 teams get bracketed out. The winner plays in this bracket. The winner plays in this bracket. It's one extra game. You're gonna have to fight it out and. I'd like to see more teams in general because I'd like to just see them have a chance. I just want to see Omaha. I'd like to see Omaha play Denver again, like you said, and say, all right, duke it out. You want in? Here you go. Here's your chance.
Well, they could do like the NCAA basketball tournament has done in recent years and just have a play-in game to play for one of the seeds in one of the regionals. And that would be kind of interesting to do. And sometime down the road, potentially try that type of thing because I think that'd be interesting. It's always tough. People are always reluctant to do that because there are only, about 60 teams in Division I hockey. And this year, because so many aren't playing, I think it's closer to 50 this year. So I know they don't want to do that. My thing is, and I know that this year they're tossing out the fact that they wouldn't let teams below 500 into the NCAA tournament. I just have a hard time letting a team that's sub 500 into the tournament ahead of a team that actually finished ahead of them in the conference standings that's, 4 games above 500, which I know they're going to argue that those 4 games were only 55% of a win, but what it just muddies the waters. And so maybe Adam Woden's right that neither of those two teams will get into the tournament, but boy, I hope UNO does. My gut says there's still a chance that they get in, but the more people talk about it, the more pessimistic people get. But I would argue, and I think UNO had an awfully good season, regardless of what happens. And boy, I'd love to see them into the tournament because it's been entertaining watching them this season. But we'll have to see what's going to happen.
And no matter what, we'll be back Sunday to at least talk about whether or not we did or did not make it and what that is.
Yeah, where they're going to be playing, what that's going to entail. Did Denver get in as well? Did neither of us get in? What the field looks like? How did they allot teams? Did they go with Jason's idea of creating interesting matchups for TV, or did they go with the Adam Woden idea, which is, representation from a variety of conferences of teams that were highly ranked this season? We'll just have to see. I don't know, but it'll be fun. And until Sunday, stay tuned to Mavpuck on Twitter and Mavpuck on Facebook, and go Mavs.
Go Mavs.